Andrew, it's been 24 years since I've seen you. You were a 14-year-old boy with a radio show that was considered a political prodigy.
1996.
You were helping Governor Foster get elected governor, and I interviewed on your radio show, and I want to say it was in Eunice, but you might tell me another location. Where was your radio show?
It was in Eunice.
It was in
correct.
Eunice, Louisiana, and I was running for Congress. You were a 14-year-old boy, and then the world kind of got turned upside down on you, didn't it?
Yes, it did.
Well, why don't you tell the viewer audience your story. Tell them what happened and where you are today and why you're sitting here today talking to this group of viewers.
In July 1997, when I was 15 years old, I committed a horrible crime. Even though I had family support, even though I was a good student, an athlete, seemingly had the world in my hand, I made a very poor decision, a series of poor decisions that started in the summer of '97 when I started to get involved with drugs, started hanging around with the wrong crowd. I know it's sort of a cliche, but that culminated with me taking someone's life in a very horrible way, and I was arrested for that when I was 15 years old. I was convicted of murder, and in Louisiana there's one sentence for that, whether you're 15 years old or 50 years old, and that's life in prison. And I spent almost 2 decades in prison. I was very fortunate to be given a second chance, thankfully due to support that I had from my family, favor that was given to me by individuals in the Louisiana Department of Corrections, giving me opportunities to better myself, to educate myself, to grow my skill set, to rehabilitate myself. And then a series of U.S. Supreme Court decisions that determine that the United States should not sentence juveniles in the same way they do adults, and we cannot give juveniles a mandatory life without sentence penalties for crimes they commit when they're teenagers. So I was able in 2016 to go before the Louisiana Parole Board, and I was granted parole. At the time, I was the first juvenile lifer in Louisiana to be granted parole out of approximately 300 juvenile lifers in Louisiana. There were about 2,400 juvenile lifers around the country at the time. And in this state, Louisiana, I was the first one given that opportunity. So I went from having a very promising life when I was young, very gifted, to someone who made a horrible mistake, more than a mistake, a decision that changed 2 families' lives and a community, to eventually be given the opportunity at redemption. And it did not stop the day I was released from prison. For the last 4 years, I've continued to try to build on that redemption and give others the same opportunity at redemption that I was given.
And you spent, 19 years in prison?
Yes, sir.
And what are you 38 years of age today?
Yes, sir.
And you can just say yes or no. You don't have to sir me anymore, Andrew. The inspiration for doing this program was a scripture called Micah 6:8. You know, where the Jews were soon to be judged by God because of their misbehavior. And they asked the prophet, what can we do? And he said, well, you do justice and you love mercy and you walk humbly with God. And today I think your story is about a story of mercy, and you've already said the word redemption. And so we know that God can redeem people. And you know, what the law does and what the law allows is one thing, but we know what God does is another. Sometimes they coincide and they're the same. Sometimes they're not. But you've been given that second chance. But tell the audience a little bit about what happened in prison that enabled you to be where you are today.
After I was convicted and sent to state prison, it was a very dark time in my life. I was depressed. I continued to be still selfish and not a very great person. And that was because I put it towards the fact that I did not have a relationship with God. I grew up as a cradle Catholic. I was born Catholic, but for me, as a kid, it was like a last name, something I was just born with. So I didn't have a relationship with God, and I'd never had a faith journey. And I had hit bottom when I first went to prison, very depressed, very little hope at the time for what my life would become. Once I went to prison, my goal was to live as normal of a life as possible. And there's sports in prison. I was an athlete, so I wanted to play sports. And there was television and there's school, and so I just wanted to have the same routine as close as I could have if I was not incarcerated. And I had the opportunity to go to church service while I was in prison. So initially, it wasn't a yearning for Scripture, but it was just, I want to be in the same routine I would have. So I went to church, but for the first time, I started listening to what I was hearing and started paying attention to the homily, and then started reading Scripture, started going to Bible studies. And I made a decision that I wanted to have a relationship with God. Even as a teenager, I realized that there was a void in my life, and even though I had been going to Mass as a child, that it was just a day trip for me and not a spiritual opportunity. So being in prison and hitting that low point where I had lost everything gave me the opportunity to turn my life over to God and truly begin that faith journey. And there were a couple moments I can think of when I was incarcerated where the light bulb went off in my head, even after I had accepted God and was praying and trying to live the best life I could while I was incarcerated. I still found myself to be the selfish young man, and the image of Christ that's always stuck with me from the time that I accepted Christ in my life. My favorite image of Him is the image of Him washing the feet of His disciples, because that showed me if the Son of Man could do this humble thing, touching and washing the feet of people who serve Him, that is a roadmap to leadership for me. And I wanted to be a leader. And so I determined that I want to take on this Christ-life form of leadership. And the best way I can be a Christian is to follow His lead. So even in prison, there are leadership opportunities, and I always tried to be that Christ-like leader where I wasn't a leader by being in charge of something or being out front, but being a leader in helping people, helping other young prisoners, helping older prisoners. Even if it was something within prison that was something that was seen to be too humble for a prisoner, those are the tasks I wanted to take on. And that's how I continue to try to live my life today. Several years into my Christian faith, though, I knew there was still a void. And sort of that aha moment for me was hearing a story that I'd heard 20 or 30 times before, and that was the parable of the unforgiving servant. And I heard it one day, and it struck me, and I realized that I was that unforgiving servant. I was the servant who was forgiven for this $1 million sin that I had committed, but I still had trouble forgiving people for the $5 sins that they would commit against me. And ever since that day, and which was truly the moment that I discovered, what grace and forgiveness truly is I forgive other people. I don't want to be the person who asked God to forgive me for this horrible act that I committed, yet I had trouble forgiving people for minor transgressions against me. So what I continue to do today is every night before I go to bed, I pray that my heart's not hardened against someone, that I forgive people for just if they said something that I didn't like, or they may have done something that I disapprove of. I try not to hold it against them, because God's forgiven me, has given me an opportunity to move past the worst thing I ever did. So to be the Christian that I want to be, walking in Christ's footsteps, I want to be that person who forgives others.
In addition to coming to Christ and starting your faith walk while you were in prison, you also took advantage of every academic opportunity that you had to read and get a high school diploma and even teach while you were in prison. Is that correct?
That's correct. I was arrested between my sophomore and junior year in high school, so I was given the opportunity to not only finish my high school degree early on, but also take college courses, also take rehabilitative programming that helped me become a better person. And then staff within the prison saw something in me, and they asked me to be a facilitator for these several programs that I had completed. So throughout the 2 decades, there were multiple programs. I was given the opportunity, even at one point, teaching the prison's pre-release class. Even though I was 15 when I went to prison, they saw something in me to teach other prisoners who were going home about the skills and the mindset they had to have as they were going home.
I want the audience to know that you got out of prison in 2016, is that correct?
That is correct.
And in a short period of time, you were embraced by Louisiana State University, and you've gone and got your college degree, and today you're working on your master's at Loyola University, and you're the executive director of the Louisiana Parole Project. Do I have all of that right, Andrew?
Yes, sir, you do.
And so, you know, the mercy that God has given you and the second chance that the society has given you, you've capitalized on it. I believe you're even married to a physician today, aren't you?
That's true.
And you when we spoke the other day, you told me that you were interested in going to law school if they would allow you to go to law school.
Yes,
I know you have your family, and I want you to tell the audience a little bit why you're so grateful for your family. And being a lawyer, I'm going to include your lawyer and the system that worked for you so that you got this second chance. Why don't you tell us how all that worked?
My family stood by my side the entire time I was incarcerated, and their support really helped me, and their love helped me to be the best person that I could possibly be. And I always wanted to respect my parents because I didn't do a good job of that, of honoring them when I was a child, and I wanted them to know the work that God was doing in my life, and even be an example for them to strengthen their faith, because it wasn't just me doing that life sentence, they were doing it with me. When they would go to bed every night, certainly they were worrying if their son was safe and healthy. But whenever I had the opportunity to be considered for release, my parents hired an attorney. I was very fortunate in that my parents could afford to hire an attorney for me. And having an attorney allowed me to cut through the red tape of the legal system. I was fortunate to have a judge who wanted to re-sentence me, and then a parole board who was able to not only look at the crime I committed, but to look at who I had become as I grew older and matured and was rehabilitated. And the day I was released from prison was a very bittersweet moment from me, because as excited as I was to leave, I built a second family while I was incarcerated. and those were mostly made up of other juvenile lifers in almost every case who had been there longer than I had, who had been incarcerated 30, 40, even 50 plus years since they were teenagers. And these were the individuals when I came to prison who were mentors for me, who didn't want me to make the same mistakes that they made when they first went to prison. So me being released before them and them being so happy for me as I was leaving was a tough moment for me, because I recognized my privilege at that moment. And I remember leaving the prison, my mother, father, and sister, who had just finished medical school, came to greet me at the prison and take me home. And my sister asked, "Now what?" And what was on my heart immediately is, I have to help other people get the same opportunity that I'm experiencing today. And that's when I had the idea to start Louisiana Parole Project.
When someone is gone to prison for a heinous crime, like the one you described, and you're paroled and released in society, what kind of reception or adversity did you receive in society? For instance, from the parents of children who are murdered, that there's various associations and so forth where they they resist any type of parole for when there's a death involved. Did you have some of that resistance from people?
Yes, Hunter, and it's great to point out that even though I am a success story, and there are other success stories like me, that there are still individuals who disagree with the second chances we got. For example, there are groups of parents who have children who were murdered who don't believe that that the individual who went to prison for that crime should ever be given a second chance. And I respect where they're coming from, because I've never had to experience that they've had. However, I've tried to not let it deter me from doing good. In fact, I've tried to be an example of redemption. That way, hopefully, one day people whose hearts are hardened against seeing redemption will one day see that it's possible, especially possible through God's grace and God's love.
What do you say to people that come up to you and say that you don't deserve to be free? No one who commits murder deserves to be free, and they're totally resistant to what you're doing.
Well, Hunter, this is the United States of America, the land of the free, and individuals who have that mindset and want to protest and speak against the kind of work we do, or against even my second chance, they have that First Amendment right. Even though in this time there are people who are trying to scrape away from our God-given rights, I respect people who want to have a differing opinion. What I would respond, though, with my own First Amendment right and with my own free speech to someone who disagreed with second chances, is I would tell them personal stories. I would tell them about Laura, who spent over 40 years in prison for a crime committed when she was a young woman. She was a victim of abuse when she was young. She's a cancer survivor while she was incarcerated. She's been given a second chance, and she's made the most of it. She has a job today. She has her own apartment. She bought her own vehicle. She's a volunteer in her community. She's a regular member at her church that she's a part of now. I would tell you the story of Roderick, who went to prison when he was 16. He was with his brother when his brother killed someone, and he spent 40 years in prison for just being present whenever a crime occurred. He was a young child when that happened. He was given a second chance. Today he uses the carpentry skills that he learned while he was in prison, not only for a job where he supports himself today, but he volunteers with Habitat for Humanity to build houses for other people. He is now a deacon in the first church that accepted him when he came home from prison. He is much more to us in society, much more value, not only to his community, but his church, than he ever was in prison. There was a time he should have been in prison, but that time passed, and he's worth more to be home. So if someone wants to disagree with individuals getting second chances, I will hear them out. I will respect their opinion. But certainly I have so many stories that I can tell that make it obvious that there are individuals who come home and their lives are more meaningful. And God, obviously, his plan was for them to be here one day. They served their purpose in prison, and now they serve an even greater purpose in their community.
I know that there's a lot of hoopla in the political environment, and that's my description of it, over recidivism, and that there's 45% of the people released from prison that end up back in prison. And so it's used as a political tool in races. I want you to tell the audience about what you're doing and the fact that the Louisiana Parole Project has 0 participants that have returned to prison. And what are the primary factors to keep men or women from going back to prison once they're paroled or released?
It's actually a lot more simple equation than most people would assume. The two most basic components of keeping someone from going back to prison is giving them safe, stable housing and living wage employment. An individual who has a safe place to lay their head at night, a place to call their own, and has a job that not only keeps them busy but gives them an opportunity to support themselves, generally keeps someone from going back to prison. And there are people who are of the mindset that, well, there are people who are just bad and that they'll always mess up and they'll always go back to prison. And to be honest, there is a very small number of people that's probably true, but most people, that is not representative of most people. We find that especially people who've served these longer sentences, they get older, they're mature, they don't do the dumb things that they do whenever they're young, and once they have an opportunity to have a place of their own, something that they can value, a job that they can work hard at, they're very unlikely to go back to prison. And that's the formula that we've created with our clients. We give them an environment to live in immediately upon coming home from prison, where they can practice their faith, where they can live clean, healthy lives, where they're not in a crime-ridden area. They don't have to go back where they came from, where they're going to meet their peers who are going to draw them back into crime. And in a lot of cases, for the first times in their lives, we're helping connect clients to employers who are willing to give people second chances, and they want to be the best employee that persons ever have. They want to prove a point. So there's actually a great success rate whenever you can work to get someone, those two things, housing and employment. And the whole goal of our program is to help people become self-sufficient. So we're not a daycare for them for the rest of their lives. We're working to get them on their feet where they can save up enough money to afford a lease for their own apartment and have their own car. And over 100 clients so far, and so this wasn't a small pool of people we've cherry-picked. Over 100 clients, the program works, the model works.
And I've seen pictures from newspaper articles of you in a van at the gate of the prisons. So you actually go meet them when they're released, and you take them directly to the Parole Project location. Is that correct?
That's correct. It's really a powerful moment when you're able to greet someone as they're getting out of prison. There are a lot of emotions, especially in our clients. They've served, more than 20 years, in some cases 30 or 40 years in prison. And as excited as they are to come out of prison, they're scared to death. They know they're coming into a world they don't recognize. We call it Rip Van Winkle syndrome. The world has totally changed since they've been home. They've never used a cell phone before. They've never used a debit card. They've never had a job interview. They've never set up a bank account in many cases. And they're scared, but they want to be successful. So we see ourselves as their training wheels. We're their training wheels while they learn to ride this bike. And then when we see that they're successful and they can do it on their own, we're going to let them ride that bike on their own.
And tell the audience, who are some of the employees or board members or participants of the Louisiana Parole Project?
So as far as employees, my staff consists of formerly incarcerated individuals because we serve as peer mentors to our clients. A lot of people coming out of prison are cynical. Well, I'm not going to get second chances. Everyone's out to get me. No one wants to see me succeed. So we actually hire people. A lot of other juvenile lifers work for us, and they serve as that model that, hey, I came home, I was successful, I built a life for myself, you can do it too. As far as board members, we're really proud of the board we have. The president of our board of directors, Dr. Mary Livers, is the former head of the juvenile justice system in Louisiana. The vice president of our board is the head of clinical law at LSU Law School. We have former bankers, lobbyists, former judge on our board. So our board consists of people who have been very active in the criminal justice system, but also business people who have a stake in the community. The whole goal of our program isn't to get people out of prison. The goal of our program is to make communities safer. We recognize, as you pointed out, that the recidivism rate's 45%. When almost half of people are going back to prison, that's more money we have to spend on police, courts, and prisons, and less money we spend on education and healthcare and infrastructure. So my goal is I want to create a system that we spend less money on sending people to prison and more money on educating kids when they're young so they don't go to prison in the first place. And that's what our employees and board work towards.
Do you find now that courts in America are looking more at those facts for these children that they want to try as adults and balancing them out as to how the penal system should adjust with it? You follow what I'm saying?
I do.
And was I pretty accurate on my analogy?
You're spot on. You're spot on, and sort of where we've gone, not only public opinion, but judges and courts for the longest time, had the attitude, you commit the crime, you do the time, end of story. And sometimes stories are more complicated than that. And what we know is children are different. When people are young, they make really impulsive, dumb decisions, not based on thinking through consequences that an adult would make. So what happened is a lot of times we would send people to prison for the rest of their life or for most of their life until they're elderly at a great cost to society. And what we know now is that that's not necessary. While we can still punish people as a society for the crimes they committed, if a person we created a Department of Corrections to correct and rehabilitate people. Warden Burl Kane at Angola, he's not there anymore, but he set up an amazing rehabilitative program that was faith-based at Angola that's changing people's lives to this day. So we're changing people's lives, but we weren't creating mechanisms to allow them to go home at some point after they had been rehabilitated. And with the criminal justice reforms that we've started to encounter in Louisiana and that are happening all over the country now, are teaching us is we don't have to send people to prison forever to protect public safety. In fact, if we get smart about it, we can give people second chances when they're young enough to go out and start a career, be contributors to the economy, be members of our local churches, be volunteers in our community, instead of bearing the cost of keeping them incarcerated forever or until they're elderly when they have to be on a social safety net when they're released. That's not to say that there aren't people who deserve to be in prison, and not to say that there aren't people who are probably unfit to return to society, but those individuals represent a very small number of people who are in prison. And I would venture to say that with rehabilitative opportunities in prison, and then with second chances like those that are being provided with organizations like Louisiana Parole Project, we can turn tax burdens into taxpayers, and we can truly offer people opportunities at second chances and rebuilding their lives.
Do you have a vision that the Louisiana Parole Project might become an American Parole Project, or something much broader than within the geographical boundaries of Louisiana or our penal system?
Yes, I do. So for many years now, Louisiana's had the distinction of being the number one incarcerator in the United States. For a brief period, we swapped places with Oklahoma, and then Oklahoma did some reforms, and now we're back in first place. So the work that we're doing is really needed in Louisiana. However, we're providing a model. This isn't, rocket science. I didn't need an engineering degree to prove what we're proving is anywhere where there is a problem with crime and there's a problem with recidivism, which is almost everywhere. If we give people opportunities, and when I say opportunities, not only letting them out of prison, but when they come home from prison, we're truly giving people a step up so they can reestablish their lives. It's really worthwhile. And what that means is not just organizations like Parole Project that are working to help, but business owners willing to say, I'm going to give this person a second chance. Someone who owns an apartment who may have a strict policy that anyone with a criminal history cannot live in my apartment building. Whenever we don't give people jobs, when we don't allow people these second chances in living, we almost give them no other opportunity but to live in a low-wage job or turn to crime or live in a high-crime area. So second chances, when you give a person a second chance, it's really meaningful for them. It gives them an opportunity to change their lives. So what I tell everyone in society I meet is find a way to mentor or encourage or be a part of that second chance. So to answer your question, my goal is to import this model throughout the country because this is a common sense model. It's working here. And if it works in Louisiana, where we've been the number one incarcerator in the country, it can work anywhere.
Andrew, just how many people go to prison and stay in prison for life versus how many get out?
It's a great question, Hunter. About 95% of people who go to prison will come home. If you think about society, when someone's arrested, it's front page story. When they go to trial and are convicted and are sentenced, it's a front page story. And then they fall out of our consciousness because there's usually not a front page story when they come home. There are people coming home from prison every day. In our community, there may be 1 or 2 or 10 or 15 every day who are coming home. And they're in the shadows. They wouldn't be reported on unless they were going back to prison again. And then it's a story about, well, the system failed because this person went right back to prison. So it would do good for society to recognize that people are coming home. And we should make investments in people. It's whenever we provide second chances, we're investing in people's lives and giving people opportunities to be better than they initially were. And I think that's something that we can really pay attention to in society because we're caught up in the front end when someone gets in trouble and not so much the back end when they come home from prison and they're looking to rebuild their lives.
I think the goal that you have and what you've done has been remarkable. And, I always like to quote the word that, Paul was, we know he was a conspirator to commit murder when he held the cloak of the Pharisees when they stoned Stephen. And we know what he was going to do when he was on the road to Damascus when he met Christ. And it all turned around. And the Apostle Paul was one of the most effective apostles in writing and being Holy Spirit inspired to write 2/3 of the New Testament. I believe God's going to use you and has used you and will use you in a big sort of way in the future. I really appreciate you coming, Andrew. I really appreciate your telling us your story, your testimony, your goals. If you would tell the audience if they wanted to donate, and this is a nonprofit, the Louisiana Parole Project, how would they go about reaching you or someone with the Louisiana Parole Project if they wanted to donate or if they just wanted to call on you for information or for help? Why don't you tell the audience how that can be done?
Our website is www.paroleproject.org, and at our website you can donate to our organization. We are a 501c3 nonprofit. We depend on private donations to do the work that we do. We also ask people to volunteer for our program. If someone wants to volunteer, a businessman, a banker, someone with real-world experience, someone who's willing to give a client a mock job interview, we certainly like new volunteers and new perspectives. But any information someone may want to find about our organization is on our website, paroleproject.org.
Thank you, and God bless you.
Thank you very much, Hunter.